Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. And not many people are talking about this, but there is still one huge elephant in the room in regards to the China-US tariffs. And I think a better way to describe this is the former relationship between the two countries. It's really hard to find anywhere how much of the various rare earth elements have been shipped from China. Nor is it easy to find out how much has been used and how much is stockpiled. But we do know they are critical in a wide range of products that the US does still manufacture. We can find references to that all over. Once the stockpiles are depleted, several industries are going to grind to a halt. For example, there are battery makers and solar panel makers in the USA. There are phone makers still and car makers, and there are medical equipment manufacturers who need rare earths. But most importantly, there are military producers. And they include everything from the most expensive aircraft carrier running in at many billions of dollars to the cheapest bullet costing a few cents to make. Now, it's not just rare earths, but another startling example of a US and EU decision to inflict self-harm on its own manufacturing was the small wad of cotton used to make something as simple as a round of ammunition, more commonly called a bullet. Until quite recently, this came from Xinjiang cotton. It is available elsewhere, but if you want to make a bullet, you do need a small wad of cotton, and most of that comes from Xinjiang. All of it is now banned in the US and the European Union because of some lunacy where they think John Deere is selling tens of millions of dollars of agricultural equipment to slaves. China produces 6,423,000 tons of cotton using agricultural and industrial machinery. And for comparison, in 1860, the US was the largest producer of cotton in the world, using almost 100% slave labor, and their largest total was 2 billion pounds, which is 907,000 tons. In other words, China, according to the so-called experts, is producing more than 7 times what 2.5 million slaves were producing. Getting back to rare earths, in fact, these are not very rare at all. Even the US has a plentiful supply of most of them, and their trade allies, such as Australia, have the rest. But over 80% of them and 99% of the critical rare earths are processed or extracted in China. China has a long list of products that it's simply blocked from going to the USA now. It's also restricted from being sold to a third party for US use. Now, this is a major win as far as I can tell for China. They will not stop doing this until the USA pulls back from global hegemony. And once current stockpiles are used, there will be nothing going across to the US to make the weapons and military materials that they need. There's also been this block on buying Boeing planes, which, as far as China was concerned, might have been a tough decision taken by them. A great many of Boeing's parts are made in a factory here in China, where Boeing has a joint venture in Fujian province. China's business, and in that region in particular, will take a hit from that decision. So the business now needs to go into China's own airline industry and France's Airbus. Maybe a couple of others too, but there will be a transition period that's going to be tough. Boeing is one of the USA's largest military industrial complex members, and the loss of a projected 8,000 planes over the next 20 years could lead to the death of that part of the industry. Although I suspect there is no way that Boeing will be allowed to fail, this is another example of where the government props up industry for the wrong reasons. I think the rare earth thing is huge. I made a video which incorporated this the other day. I sincerely believe the US is now ashamed or frightened to mention it. Very simply put, the US will never admit that they haven't got the capacity to go to war. Losing Xinjiang cotton would have added to the cost of making bullets, and they make a lot of them. Almost every product they use in military will need microchips, and China makes most of them too, although they are of the lower level where they can be sourced elsewhere. But again, that'll add to the cost of anything electronic that the military needs. Rare earths are where the US loses not only its bargaining power, but also its credibility. Now, Washington, in a widely regarded example of the pot calling the kettle black, has accused China of economic coercion over these. but it's being very guarded about what it says. It claims in media releases that China controls 60% of the market. The truth is it's closer to 90 or more. Many other places have rare earths, but they send them to China for extraction. One expert on such matters, Gracelyn Bascarin, was quoted in a recent interview as saying, "The difficulty is that China actually processes nearly 100% of these, which means not only do they mine them, but they source heavy rare earths from around the world, bring them back to China and separate them." An F-35 fighter jet uses about 450 kilograms of rare earths, 900 pounds. So they're stockpiling it in the US, but that's going to prove to be crucial. Australia wants its submarines. The Philippines want their jets that they've ordered. Every country in the world doing business with the US in military hardware is going to be looking for products. And those products are being consumed on a daily basis in the battlefields of Ukraine and Gaza. Here's a very serious question. Some of the products the US is still making are things like MRIs, magnetic resonance images, and PET scanners. They use rare earths too. Is the Trump administration going to do what it did during the COVID pandemic and divert necessary supplies to where it thinks it needs them more? If so, there will be a lot of medical supply companies screaming about not being able to supply and install life-saving equipment because all the good stuff has been diverted into life-taking munitions. Could the US do what it accused Russia of doing a couple of years ago and start to dismantle medical equipment to seize the important elements that it needs to supply military machines? It wouldn't be the first time the US has projected onto others something that it has done or is about to do itself. In an interview I heard on NPR, Bascarin, the expert, was asked, are these, China, restrictions impactful enough that China could force the US to back down on tariffs? And I think we're seeing that now. Her reply was sane and rational, but not simple. She said, "It's a very powerful negotiating tool that China has. At the end of the day," she went on, "the US is going to have to make a decision on whether it's going to continue its tariff trajectory with China, but at the cost of the very minerals that we need for our national security, our economic competitiveness, and our energy resilience. They are in semiconductors, iPhones, and most forms of energy technology as well." These are very sobering words indeed. The US is not in a great position here. No one in military, no one in Western media mainstream, and no one in the administration is talking about this fact. In fact, they're lying their heads off about it. Trump's been caught in a couple of lies when he says he and Xi Jinping, or they and China, are talking. They're not. If they were, it would have been all over the media. Chinese media says, no, we're not. If the US can't deliver what they promised to their allies, if they divert medically important resources to military projects, they will face a storm of protest both internationally and domestically. It's no wonder they don't want to talk about this. The restriction on rare earths might just be the best thing that China has ever done for global security. Think about that. And I will see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, and bye for now.